Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about starting law school. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about starting law school in these, shall we say, interesting times. Well, Lee, can you believe we're still having basically this same conversation? I really didn't think that this is what we would be doing, like when, I thought about this earlier in the summer.
No, I mean, back in May, we just had such high hopes for normalcy that it all seems to be crumbling around us right now.
Yeah, even like early July, everything was looking good. I'm like, great, everybody's going to be back in person, no problem. We're talking to law students, everybody's excited. Now we're just kind of in the middle of it again. That, I guess, is what it is.
It is what it is, but it's just awful. So I really feel for everybody who is heading back to law school, because I think a lot of people probably deferred due to COVID and thinking this year was going to be better. And I think it is going to be better maybe than last year, but I'm sure that there's still a lot of uncertainty around the start of law school.
Right. Or even people who did 1 year and they were totally virtual and now they're coming back and it's sort of like the reality, the real law school almost happening again. But we're not talking about those people today. We're talking about the people who are just coming in for the first time. So yeah, let's talk about law school. Well, I mean, we've got a lot of content on this. Frankly, people can go and listen to a bunch of ideas we have for incoming law students, but let's run through a list, so you don't have to go backwards in time. And we'll also talk about how, COVID's kind of impacting some of these things. So Lee, what's first on your list of things you should be thinking about as you begin law school?
Well, I think you really want to make sure that you have your life in order. So hopefully if you're starting school in the next few days or weeks, it's very clear about what your school environment is going to be like. And I'm going to guess that you're still going to end up doing a lot of work from home, even if you're going to school. So you want to make sure that your home life, your housing is set up, you've got a workspace in your house, you have a plan for feeding yourself, not just pizza, how you're going to take care of yourself, like physically. Are you going to, take walks, go exercise, all of that stuff. And I think that what makes this year a little, continuing to be unique is that you have to do all of this stuff knowing that there could be COVID restrictions on them, even if you're vaccinated. So, although many people may have wanted to go to the school gym, that might not feel comfortable for you. So what's going to be your option? I did an online yoga class today in my office before doing podcasting, Zen, but I have to say that I've gotten kind of used to it and I actually enjoy it. I never used to do that kind of stuff before COVID, but I think we have a lot more options for taking care of ourselves in our home spaces than we used to have.
No, I think it's a great point. We do always talk about this kind of top of the list, and I think sometimes that confuses people because they're like, but what about reading cases? And it's like, well, yeah, but you can't do any of that unless you're in a certain physical and mental state to be able to focus and be present and that kind of thing. So even if it might seem boring, I think if you're, we just talked to so many people who end up having problems their first semester, and it's basically because their life was in chaos. So issues with their transportation or housing or relationships or whatever it might be. But that kind of chaos can just really cause a lot of turmoil in your actual academic life. I mean, I'm thinking now, you probably may not be able to go to the library to study. The library may not be open, all these places, all these things I did in law school to kind of stay sane and break up my day and break up the monotony of reading case after case after case. I would do that at lots of different places. Maybe for a few hours it would be a coffee shop, and then I might go to a different library that wasn't the law library. And a lot of that's probably not immediately going to be accessible to people, unfortunately.
Or you have to wear masks inside, depending on where you're at school. And so for me, maybe it's worth it to, be able to be in class and wear a mask. I mean, my kids do it. I'm pretty sure that as a grown-up, we could all do it. However, I probably don't want to, I used to just hang out in the library for 5 hours.
Right, exactly.
6 hours a day.
I'm thinking a large portion of my day was spent either in a coffee place or a library.
Yeah. And also, if you are COVID conservative, I also like to think about, a lot of these decisions is, where am I going to put my risk, right? I'm going to do, every activity has a risk level. And, sure, there's going to be risk to doing class and other things that you want and need to do in person. But maybe you feel safer by studying, in your home bubble.
Right.
But then you also need to have a good place to do that. You don't want to just be doing that on the couch, or you'll start developing bizarre body problems from just sitting on the couch. Maybe even if you were able to pull that stuff off in undergrad, as we age, it's just not as easy to study and work for as long as you do during law school, unless you have a good ergonomic setup to take care of yourself.
Yeah, so this is like, all the kind of not super interesting stuff. Like, do you have a good ergonomic chair? And places like Craigslist can actually be a good place to get those. It doesn't have to be something brand new or even something super expensive, but it probably shouldn't be a dining chair that you're going to be sitting in for 8 to 12 hours a day while you're reading and doing other things. And it probably shouldn't be, like you said, a couch or like a lounge chair. Like, you need something that is actually supportive, or you're going to end up with carpal tunnel and neck problems, like all of these things. And again, like, that's just not great for your academic focus.
Yeah. Other places that are great to find furniture and things like that I just recently started using Nextdoor for this.
I've heard good things.
Yeah, and Nextdoor, a lot of people are posting stuff on Nextdoor, as well as Buy Nothing groups on Facebook. But the bummer about Buy Nothing is it can take you a while to get accepted to the group, whereas Nextdoor, it can be very quick to get onto Nextdoor, so you might be able to even accumulate stuff much faster because there won't be the lag that some of the Facebook groups have.
Yeah, I just gave something away on FreeCycle, actually.
Which I haven't used.
Yeah, well, it has both, like, people are looking for things and people are offering things. And it's kind of ironic because I was cleaning my garage, as I think you know, and I came across these, like, big pieces of, like, plastic that were designed to go under your office chair, but I'd changed the carpet. So these are, they're like 4 feet wide type of things. They're big and they're kind of bulky. And I was looking at them and thinking, man, this is probably something nobody would ever want. Like, I don't know, like, how am I going to get rid of this? And I just happened to open one of the emails from the FreeCycle, and someone was looking for them, like exactly that. And so he came and got both of them, and like now they're out of my life, and this guy's happy, and everybody's happy,
Yes, I have been doing a parallel garage clean out project, and it is amazing what other people need and get excited about.
And this guy was thrilled. He's like, yeah, I've got this office. It's U-shaped. Like, you've got 2 of them. This is going to be perfect. I'm like, great. Take them off my hands and use them. I am very happy for you.
Yeah. So you really don't need or even should invest a ton of money in setting up a home workspace, but you want to have one. So if you don't have one set up, that would probably be one of my first things to think about as you're getting ready for school. But as someone who did maybe study a little too much at my dining chair and my tiny table that I got off of Craigslist for like $15, I wouldn't recommend it. Even my 25-year-old self, I just wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I did most of my reading at our dining table that we bought for like $100 at IKEA with chairs and table. So, I mean, like, it was fine. It was actually not that terrible because at least it was a tiny little room and I was the only one in there. I kind of claimed it because I had 2 roommates. I claimed it as my like 7 p.m. to like 10 p.m. reading zone, and no one really bothered me, but it definitely was not the most comfortable chair to sit in long term. I also had a desk chair like in my actual bedroom, so if I was writing or something, I would use that.
Yeah. The other thing, and we've talked about this on other podcasts, is just to like get your life in order to automate as much as you can. So you don't have to spend time like paying bills or keeping track of something. Like, you should be able to automate your rent, automate all your bills, like just automate, and get it all set up so you just really don't have to constantly be thinking about things. The other thing that I think can be helpful as far as getting your life in order is really think about how you're going to track your to-do list. I personally have been nerding out this week on this blog post I read about using Gmail as your to-do list.
I saw you sent something about that, but frankly, I did not open and read.
That's okay, because you're better with your to-do list than I am with mine. I keep like breaking up with all of my to-do lists. But one of the things that reminded me was, you've got to have a solid way to capture things that need to be done, especially as your life gets busier and busier. So if you don't have a system in place for that and you're starting school in the next few weeks, I would suggest that you try some different systems and see what works for you, because you're going to need to make sure stuff doesn't fall through the cracks.
Right. There's just going to be a lot of things and of varying degrees of difficulty and varying degrees of importance that you need to do. And some of the things aren't hard, but they are important. You know, if you don't file like a certain piece of paper, like bad things may happen. So, right. You know, it's just all this stuff. I mean, I typically do some combination of like an online version on Trello, and then I have like a handwritten version that I kind of do like every few days to kind of like get the brain dump out, which has resulted in my office being a pile of notes at this point. But
that's a side note, the cleanliness of your workspace.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's actually something to be said about like, you know, blocking out some time every week, even, you know, even if it's 30 minutes, just to kind of tidy up your workspace, go through all these papers that accumulate, all this stuff, you know, it can kind of weigh you down and make you not want to be in that space. So again, like it sounds ridiculous to say this is like a key to success in law school, but I think it is actually worth looking at.
Yeah, I think it is. And you know, just committing to something and really trying it out. At some point, you just have to have a system in place.
Gotta have your process.
Yeah, you gotta have your process. And so for me, one of the things I had been doing, which is why I got so obsessed with this blog post that we'll link to in the show notes, because maybe someone else will share my obsession, is I frequently, when I'm out and about in the world, email myself to-dos, but then they get lost in the disaster that is my inbox.
Oh my gosh, Lee, do you not realize I set you up a Trello board you can email to?
And the problem is I just don't, because it's faster because I'm in the email. I know. See, the thing is you solved this problem for me and I couldn't do it.
No, so like this is how I solve the problem. This is literally how I organize my life is I can email to that board and it just pops up immediately in my email. And I'll just CC that email address. Like sometimes I'll send it to myself, like thinking I'll do it or whatever. But I always CC it because literally I'll go in 2 days later and be like, what in the world is this about? Oh, right. That was that thing I was supposed to do.
Yeah, I know.
Have it.
You got to have it. So that's another great way is to we have another great blog post that we have talked about before about Trello being a great way to manage your to-do list. But you got to come up with a system. And if your system's not working for you, you got to pivot. So really the reality is practice, do some research, try things out. But you have to be able to track all of your responsibilities in your life in one place.
Right. And that's like long-term and short-term, which is kind of what makes this challenging. But there are ways to handle the onslaught. And the sooner you get good at this, the better, because it's not something that goes away when you start being a lawyer. It just accelerates. You have more things to keep track of.
Yeah. And then the more complicated your life is outside of work, it just gets crazier.
Yeah.
Crazier.
So even things like shared calendars with partners and stuff like that, like get all of that set up now.
Oh, yeah. Learn Google Calendar. How powerful is that? It really is amazing. All the different types of calendars, sharing calendars with people. It's great. You can have a study group calendar. I mean, the options are endless. Yeah. But you got to like understand your technology and be able to use it to collaborate. All right. You also need to get all of your support system in place. So these are, setting expectations with friends and families. If you have a therapist, you should be deciding how you're going to meet with them. If you don't have a therapist, you probably want to find out if your school has free therapy. But I think it is important to make sure that you have people to go to when there are difficult moments. Maybe you have a coach. Maybe, you learn about the options at school. Do they have TAs? Do they have tutors? What does their academic support office look like? How do you talk to professors? Has any of this changed in COVID times? Because even, the way people interact with professors may depend. I'm guessing schools in different parts of the country are going to have different models.
Oh, yeah. I'm guessing that's true.
Oh, yeah. Guessing that's true. So make sure that you just understand what your support options are, because I think everyone is going to want some sort of support in some way during school. And so you want to make sure that you have all of that laid out. And especially if you move to a new location, if you don't have a doctor, understand what student services is going to be, because you might get a sinus infection. It's not just about COVID. It's just about what do you do if you need a prescription for something? Who are you going to go to?
Right. Or at one point I got really horrible food poisoning and had to go to student health and get an IV, and I'm like, okay, great. Yeah. This is exciting. But these things happen.
Yeah. I got food poisoning a couple weeks ago from a salad.
True.
The worst. Very true. Yeah. Hadn't been sick since 2019, but the salad brought me down.
Well, there you go. Only eat pizza. That's a takeaway here.
Exactly. Don't eat the kale. Don't eat the kale.
No leafy greens. They're dangerous.
No leafy greens from a restaurant. I know.
Yeah, and there is there's good evidence that they've done studies of people who are in school, and they found that people who kind of think ahead of time, what would I do if this particular problem arose? actually tend to be more successful when the type of problem does arise. So, you might think like, well, what if I'm midway into the semester and I'm not understanding a concept? Who would I go to for that? And if you kind of think about it now, I mean, that's almost inevitably going to happen. So then you have your kind of toolbox of like, oh, well, I thought I could go to my study group or my TA or my professor, or academic support, or get a tutor. These are all things I'm going to look at, so that you're not just kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't understand it. There's nothing I can do.
Yeah, it's very true. And the other thing you want to think about is, whether their life things might come up, and make sure that, I would handle them in the early part of the semester. So I'm thinking about cars, like, do you have a car that's going to need a smog check? Did you move to a different place where that becomes difficult?
Register it.
Do you have to go to the DMV and get a real ID? Do you need, all of these life things can really feel big when you're very busy. And also feel very big in the COVID world when these different periods of time happen. So right now we live in the Bay Area and we are in the middle of, the same Delta spike that is happening other places. There are appointments that I made assuming I could just get everything handled right now, and I'm choosing to delay things. I'm waiting for this to pass. And so you also don't want to leave things to the last minute and then have to take care of things in an environment you don't want to take care of them. So like, maybe if you know you have to go to the dentist in a few months, look for a good time to go and then just get it off your list. I'm going to delay my dentist appointment again. I know you don't agree with me on this, but I don't want to go right now in the Delta surge. And now I feel bad because I should have gone when things were much better a couple months ago.
Well, you can always go to my new dentist who makes you do a test beforehand. So I felt pretty confident about that.
We might get there.
Yeah, they're good. I trust the dentist, but I did switch dentist, because I didn't trust the first one I was going to. But yeah, I mean, the other thing you can think about if you're a student is like, well, how much of this can wait until winter break? So, or your teeth are probably not going to fall out of your head. If you don't get your dentist appointment done now, you could probably do it when you're not in school. Like, it's probably okay.
Yep, that's true. But like, don't add it and then be all stressed out about it. Just decide you're going to table it. Right. I think that's one of the things, just making the decision and moving it off your plate is so important, because decision fatigue is no joke. And I think that if you are constantly having to make all these tiny little life decisions when you're also trying to learn a new skill, it can be a lot.
Yeah, it's currently driving me nuts because my health insurance people keep telling me I need to do something, and I'm perfectly willing to do this thing and make an appointment for it in October, but they haven't opened their calendar that far yet.
Oh, that's annoying.
And they just keep sending me. I'm like, I would do this if you would. I would put it on the schedule if you would let me, but you won't. So stop bothering me about it.
Totally. Like, I don't want to respond to these things.
Like, mailing me something in the mail when you've already left me voicemail and sent email is not going to make me do it. I've actually checked the website. It's literally not possible to schedule when I want to schedule yet.
Right.
Like, leave me alone. Because it does become annoying. And every time I see one of these things, I'm like, oh, I still haven't managed to do this, but it's not my fault.
Right. Totally. Okay, so you got to get your life in order, get your support network in place, try and remove as many distractions from the semester time as you can. You also need to kind of figure out from an academic perspective of what exams are going to look like. I think this is one of the big mistakes 1Ls make is they don't really appreciate what the end game is in the beginning.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that you're listening and reading your syllabi and things like that if they have that information, or if not, figure out how you're going to get that information, either by talking to your professor, getting a mentor that might be older, going to TAs, going to meet with the professor. But you need to understand what the end game is when you get ready to start studying.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people have literally, have no idea what an essay exam in law school might look like, they can go listen to our favorite unappreciated episode of the podcast that we did many moons ago, where Lee and I actually go through an exam, talk about it. We will link to that episode. It's really one of our favorites. It gets very few listens. So if you listen to it, you'll probably be ahead of the curve.
And it makes us happy because I was really proud of that episode, but I don't know. But I don't know why people aren't as excited about it.
Well, it probably sounds boring to them.
Maybe. Boring, but important.
Yeah. But I think the point is, you don't want to, for the first time, look at what you're going to be asked to do on an exam like a few weeks beforehand. That's too late.
Too late.
And a lot of people do. I mean, I don't think like halfway through the semester or something, I think I started looking at some practice tests to be like, oh, okay. But, you get so focused on like the day-to-day of class and what you're talking about that it can really, I think, confuse people about what, as you said, the end game is. So the end game is not can you tell me the holding of case X, Y, or Z? That's not what we're asking. It's like, can you synthesize and use this information and apply it to a new set of facts? And so that's something that if you understand what you're going to be asked to do, I think it would inform a lot of the decisions people make throughout the semester in terms of what are you highlighting in your class notes? What are you putting in your briefs if you're doing them? All of these kind of things, so that you make sure you're really learning the material in a way that's going to be useful.
Yeah, because you need to build in time in your schedule to do what we call deep work.
Yep.
I mean, you have to do all the busy work too, but the deep work is really when you're synthesizing the information, when you're doing the practice hypos. But how do you know what kind of practice you're supposed to be doing if you don't understand what the exam's going to look like?
Right. If you have multiple choice, you need to practice that from the start.
Got to practice that.
Where are you going to find those questions? Maybe you need to think about that now.
Right. So the more information you can get early. Yeah, exactly. The more information you get early, the better you can apply that deep work to work that's actually going to have a good outcome. And then you don't do what so many people do, which is they just spend all this time building these 100-page outlines that don't actually get them closer to what they need to do, and then they end up scrapping them and doing something different kind of come a few weeks before exams. So make sure you are working to the end game.
Yeah, I think there's just this tendency for people to kind of like think more is better, and more is really not better necessarily here. More in your outline, a longer outline is not really what you need to be doing. You need to be actually kind of the opposite, like consistently cutting that material down. So, you start with like everything you read in a case book, which is, hundreds of pages, maybe thousands of pages. And by the time you go into that exam, you really want to have the basics of that class on 2 pieces of paper. So that's your goal, not having like a 150-page outline that just sort of kind of condenses what you read.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only way you can really appreciate what needs to be in those 2-page sheets are by practicing and realizing what you need. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you have to find out everybody works slightly differently, and you've got to be able to test your own materials and make sure they're working for you.
Or even radically differently. I mean, I'd say that's another piece of advice. Like, I did law school like radically differently from other people because I'm a visual learner. Like, that's what made sense to me. I was drawing things. I was doing colored flowcharts, and that was fine. It worked out fine. But for someone else, you might look at that and be like, this is a total waste of time. Like, you're doing art projects.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's fine. We can do it differently.
It's true. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is how you're going to handle distractions. Before we got on this podcast, we were discussing my tendency to doom scroll these days, which is not helping my productivity at all. And you were talking about how you have been totally distracted by something else and how much better you feel not doom scrolling and reading the news all the time.
It is true. I mean, we won't discuss my new distraction, but leave it as what it is, and it's sort of funny. But it is actually very, very distracting, I will say. And in some ways, that's good because it does keep me from doom scrolling. But it also, unless I'm careful, can make it hard to get other work done. So,
true.
I think it's not realistic for people to think they're not ever going to be distracted. And that's not even necessarily healthy. You can't just work all the time. Like, you do need distractions. I think it's just a question of like really being cognizant of, are you spending a bunch of time, doom scrolling the news? Are you spending tons of time on TikTok that you could be, that's not making you feel like more relaxed? Are you doing whatever crazy stuff you're doing? And I think, you just got to put boundaries really around that to make sure that it's not, to make sure basically the goal, I think, is when you're working and you're studying, that's your focused time. And then when you're not, that's your time off and you can do whatever you want. But when those start kind of meshing together, it almost ends up being like not great on either side.
I think that's true. And, I was reading a blog post. See, this is the problem. I was reading an Instagram post or a blog post or whatever. I was like scrolling
something on the internet.
Something on the internet. But it was discussing the importance of being present in whatever you're doing. And I think this is also such an important concept, especially when you're doing something intellectually challenging in law school, is it's not about multitasking. So if you are taking time off, like, and doing whatever your distraction is, like, even if it's TV, like, put the phone away. Don't like have your don't have your materials on your lap. Like, just enjoy the brain space. I've been watching a lot of subtitled European TV shows on Netflix. And the nice thing about that is Yeah, well, yeah, it is very fancy, but in reality, I can't look at my phone and watch those TV shows because I don't speak, like one of them is French and I don't speak French. So other than like words that I understand, I cannot follow the plot if I'm not reading the subtitles. And I found that it's kind of an easy way to just be like, you got to put down your phone or you can't follow the TV show. It like really calls you out. And so, being present in your work and tabling distractions is important, but also being present when you're doing your distractions so you can enjoy them.
Last night was sort of funny because I needed a distraction from my new hobby that was stressing me out, and so I was like, oh, I need to watch the finale of like an old episode of the British baking show. So that was really engaging to distract me from my distracting hobby.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's got to do something to distract themselves. But I think it is important to just be present in whatever you're doing and not try and multitask because it makes us all crazy. Even though we think we can do it well, most of us cannot.
Well, and it makes you make bad choices. I can also attest to that from my new hobby where I did something that I would not have done, except I was also talking on the phone and wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah. You need your whole brain. The other thing, if you are struggling with things like doom scrolling and things like that, I also have time limits for social media on my phone. And I think that is also a great reminder to just be like, this is how much I've decided I can scroll during the day. And then when it's over, it's over. And I found that really helps too.
Well, and also just be careful what you're doing at night, like if you're doing something on your phone that's like upsetting or even really engaging right before you're trying to fall asleep, and you've also got all the stuff that you're learning going on in your head. I think being kind of cognizant of your sleep hygiene and like the wind down period and all of these things that also sound boring, I know. But as someone who had chronic insomnia for 3 years in law school, I will say they make a difference. The blue light stuff, but also just, maybe you read a boring book for an hour or like take a bath or do some yoga or something to kind of get your brain like calm and let you actually sleep, because that's so critical to memory and retention and all of those things. And it can become, trust me on this one, a very bad downward spiral if you're not sleeping.
Yeah. And I was reading something about helping kids sleep, and they were talking about how good we are as parents typically of like creating this routine for them. And, they know exactly what comes next, and it's this whole preparation for sleep. And then for ourselves, we like plug in our phone and go to bed. Right. And like, that's not really like we still need the same sort of signals to like wind down. And so we have to think about what those routines are. My routine lately has been trying to read in bed instead of like watching TV on my phone or scrolling or whatever. And it is amazing how much better I sleep if I don't have devices with me. It's like shouldn't be that surprising because every single article you read about sleep says that, but it's so hard to put them down and let it go.
Yeah, and I just think the more information you're trying to cram into your brain on a daily basis, the more important it is to pay attention to that wind down and things, because it's hard what you're doing and your brain is really active, and our brains don't just shut off like because we want them to, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. The other thing, going back to the classroom in school, is you've got to manage kind of disappointment and frustration, especially when weird things happen at class and you get, you don't know the answer when you're called on, you might be embarrassed. I mean, the Socratic method is really set up so you're going to end up having a negative experience at some time in law school.
Right.
And you've just got to realize that although you will be scarred by it, no one else is scarred by it. Nobody's going to remember. Nobody's going to talk to you at your 10-year reunion about what you said in some class. You just got to learn to let things go.
Right. I mean, you could probably tell them. We could both tell you a story about the time we blew something, but I guarantee you no one else remembers any of that.
No. And I don't remember anyone else screwing up in law school.
No, never.
Never. So you got to be practice letting those things go, work on your growth mindset, make sure that you can take things as a learning experience, and, figure out how to let things go. And it's also a good skill because you're going to make mistakes at work.
Definitely.
And you got to learn how to fix them and let them go too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of this, in terms of making mistakes, I think one of the things people want to be doing early on is really realistically evaluating how things are going. And by that, I don't mean like you made a mistake in class, you're going to flunk all of your exams. I mean, really paying attention to how long are things taking you? Does this seem reasonable? Because you really you want to try really hard not to fall behind at the start of the semester, because I think where people really get sunk is they fall behind for whatever reason, and then suddenly they're at a point where there's almost no way to catch up, and that's just a bad situation.
Yep. Yeah. And I think this happens in normal times when people would get sick is usually the first time people fall behind. I remember I got the flu my second semester, first year of law school. I am embarrassed to say I was in class with 103-degree fever, and I didn't know that.
The things we used to do.
I mean, it got worse while I was there. So, I mean, I left at lunch, at the break, but I didn't realize I was so sick until my friend was like, please leave. I was like, fair point. But, I think we're much more cautious about that now, hopefully. We've all learned a lot about viruses and how we get sick. But I also think that, missing classes, then you don't necessarily read for class, or you might be sick, or what if you have to quarantine for COVID? Like, there are lots of different situations where you might miss class, and you just have to figure out like how you're going to keep up. But what you can't do is, like, let's say you get sick, hopefully it's not COVID, you miss a few classes, you're behind on your reading, you're behind on class. What you cannot do is continue to stay behind for the rest of the semester. At some point, you have to decide you're not going to do the reading, or you're just going to take the notes from class, or you're only going to read a couple of the cases, but you got to get caught up and keep moving forward with the class, or you can get into a downward spiral where you just never catch up through the rest of the semester.
Yeah, I think that's a situation where you want to get a good supplement, read the relevant sections, and also think about who in your class seems like the nicest, kindest person, and just really ask them if you can borrow their notes. And most likely they will say yes.
Yes. In fact, that was what my friend said next to me when she realized I was sick. She's like, please leave. I will take really great notes.
Yeah.
I was like,
even if you don't have a friend in the class, like, who seems friendly? Like, just explain the situation. They're probably going to be willing to help you out.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can always go to your professor and get questions answered. I mean, the only thing terrible that can happen is if you don't try and remedy it and just stay underwater the rest of the semester.
Right.
Like, you can come back from missing a few classes. It's fine.
And also, people may not be aware, but like academic support also often are like, they often have someone who's a designated note taker for various reasons. So I think you even did that.
I did.
If you go to the professor, you go to like someone at your school and be like, I had to miss 3 days of class because I was sick and I didn't go. Like, can you help me? Like, the odds are there may be actually like, oh yeah, cool, we can just give you those 3 days of notes.
Yeah. There are lots of options that are better than just staying behind. So just make sure you remedy the situation. If you've had to miss class, just figure it out so you can get back on track.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the one thing I would say people don't need to worry about at this point that they often do, I mean, I was guilty of this. I think you can really mostly set aside job concerns for the first semester.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
This is like learning to do law school, try to get the best grades possible. Like, not be obsessing about like, am I going to get like a 1L summer job? It's just too early for that, and don't worry about it.
No, you just got to like put that down, move on, and there'll be plenty of time to look for jobs. The best thing you can do for your job prospects are get good grades.
Right. And if you do want to do a little bit, we also have some podcasts we can link to, but like, really, you don't need to be worrying about that right now.
Yep. Especially in COVID land where like networking and all of that is just not the same as it was. Yeah. I think so. Just go ahead and just do the best as you can academically, and that's going to give you the most options when it comes to your jobs.
Exactly.
And COVID. I guess I feel like this is the doom scrolling part of the of the episode. I'm tired of talking about it, but it's so omnipresent. I mean, the problem is we can't plan ahead. There's a lot of uncertainty. We've all got to be flexible. We're all fatigued, and we just have to keep moving forward because there's no other option other than getting vaccinated. So please, if you have not gotten vaccinated and you are able to do so, please, 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 as a mom of 2 little kids who are not eligible to be vaccinated, please get vaccinated.
Yeah, because to be honest, like, I just don't feel like people are going to have that much sympathy for you. I mean, that might be the one time I wouldn't give someone my notes, to be honest, is like, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't feel that much sympathy. I'm sorry. Maybe it makes me a terrible person, but you're not getting my notes.
No, I know. You can't, if you go to class, you're endangering other people around you. Please do it. Just please do it. Yeah. So I would just do that to protect yourself and those around you. And also just be sure that you have a plan if your classes do have to go remote or if you have to quarantine. Again, this goes back to like setting up a workspace in your house, making sure you have good internet, all of those kinds of things, because you don't know what's coming down the pipe. None of us do.
We do not know. Looks like we're just going to have to roll with this for a little while longer. So I think, we can all hope for the best, but the reality is we are in a very uncertain situation. Things will likely be changing, and they may change very quickly, and you just have to be responsive to that.
Yep. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yay, you're starting law school. Congratulations.
I know. Hopefully you will graduate in a better world than you have started. But I think maybe one of my final thoughts is that we have helped a lot of law students during this COVID time. And I think not all of them have hated some of the changes that law schools have made. I think there are hopefully your school has better online resources. The professors are more available virtually, and that may be easier, especially for people who are at commuter schools. I think maybe professors are going to implement technology in a way that they hadn't before. And I think there might be some benefits to going post-COVID, that because lessons were learned on all parts.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's going to make the worst thing ever. I think take advantage of whatever opportunities present themselves, but just be prepared. And I think one thing too that people really learned last year is, if you are just like kind of sitting in your house alone and studying all the time, like that can get really hard. Yeah. And so, it's okay to reach out to people and say like, look, I'm really struggling right now, like, because you've got to take some steps to do something differently, but there are definitely options. And I think just the more that you can kind of be aware of like your own state of mind and that kind of thing, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, good luck. Have a growth mindset. Roll with the punches. And someday we'll all look back at this time, and I don't think we're going to laugh, but at least we'll have some stuff to talk about. That's how I'm looking at it now.
I mean, it's kind of a growth experience for the world, I guess, in a way.
It is.
I don't know. Not one we would have picked, but, you basically just have to roll with it. I mean, there's really no other option.
There isn't. So you might as well make the best out of the situation you're handed.
Exactly.
And don't doom scroll. Don't do as I do.
And get vaccinated, please.
And get vaccinated. I did get vaccinated. We've been vaccinated for a long time. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.